Today, fortunately, the worst of the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, but cast your mind back to 2020 when the then growing health crisis had all of us facing a new reality, one with everything from new lessons on how to wash your hands, sing the happy birthday song, remember, to the big one we all had to accept, apparently, closing schools for a long time, an indefinite period. Experts at the time said that decision was made to keep our kids safe and stop the spread of this deadly disease, that it was necessary, it had to happen. But a new book argues that schools were safe to reopen way earlier than many of them did. The book is called An Abundance of Caution. It's written by investigative journalist David Zweig, who argues the decision to shut down schools was made while, quote, ignoring or dismissing real-world evidence. And David joins us now. Follow the science, trust the science. That's what we were all told. You were publishing articles throughout the pandemic in places like The Atlantic and elsewhere that raised questions about really whether the science was being followed, and now you put it together in this book. What'd you find?
One of the reasons I think my book is being received really well is that I approach the topic apolitically, and that's how I was able to publish a lot of these articles that both challenged the establishment position, but I did it from within establishment media. And unfortunately, because our culture and our country is so politically acrimonious and divided, what we find is that, and what I talk about in the book at length, is that much of the response led by our public health establishment, aided by the media, was very politically motivated. And I can give you two quick examples on this. And because of this, this kept millions of healthy children out of school, including kids didn't step foot in a classroom for more than a year, healthy children, while at the same time, adults down the street could be having a glass of wine.
It was wild. Yeah, there's the loss of access to learning, but also you're kept in an environment that's sometimes dangerous for kids when they're not at school.
That's right. Child abuse skyrocketed. You have a kid who's kept home with a monster. Why? Because teachers and educators are the first line of defense who can see when abuse is happening. That was taken away from
So why did
children.
it happen? Because the American Academy of Pediatrics, as you point out in your book, recommended a swift reopening of schools very early, and it was happening in Europe.
They did, and so the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, came out with guidance. They basically said, no matter what, let's get kids in school. It's so important. They're at basically zero risk. They're not going to be super spreaders. And don't even worry about 6 feet of distancing. If you can 3 feet, that's fine. Just get them into the classroom. Shortly thereafter, Donald Trump tweeted in all caps, open the schools in the fall with a bunch of exclamation points. Immediately after, the AAP reversed its guidance. Gone was the idea of no matter what, get them in the classrooms. Gone was this idea, don't worry about 6 feet of distancing. Instead, they replaced it with listen to the experts, and we need a lot of money, otherwise the schools can't open. And the other piece is not only what was in this new guidance, but who the co-authors were. And it was the two largest teachers' unions.
Wow.
So let's talk about the health officials who were making these recommendations. We had Dr. Anthony Fauci on last year talking about the decision to close schools, and here's what he said.
Shutting down everything immediately, and we didn't shut it down completely, but essentially major social distancing in even schools was the right thing. How long you kept it was the problem. Because there was a disparity.
So you have said that health officials made errors in their assessment of the data. What errors, what did they get wrong?
Well,
and how did they get it wrong? Because these are top scientists.
Sure. Unfortunately, much of my book is about the failure of the expert class. And one of the most stark examples, kind of the original sin, if you will, is at the end of April and the beginning of May, millions of children started going back to school in Europe. 22 countries in Europe began reopening their schools. And there was a meeting of the education ministers at the EU in May, and they said, we have observed no negative consequences of schools reopening. A month later, they met again. They had the same reaction. They told everybody, schools are open, millions of kids are in. There's no negative consequences. And you know who covered that in America? This is huge news. This wasn't an obscure blog post. This wasn't in a medical journal. This is the EU. No one. No one covered it.
CBS News covered it. I have an article right here.
Oh,
yeah, we did. I'll show it to you.
You covered the...
Millions of kids around the world adjust
Fantastic.
to the reopening of schools.
Fantastic. Finally...
but maybe your point is that it wasn't widely covered.
This was not widely. That was a good gotcha you had on me.
No, it wasn't meant to be a gotcha. It was
but the greater point of the general consensus and in the coverage as well. I mean, you have a great point in the book about the New York Times had an article that said cases could soar in communities if schools reopen soon. On the very same day that the British Medical Journal, the prestigious journal in the UK, wrote an article, published an article, children are not super spreaders. time to go back to school. The disconnect between what was happening there and what was happening here, I mean, we're still dealing with the consequences.
And we weren't really talking about it widely, what was happening in Europe.
Yeah. This isn't exactly what I was talking about, but that's okay. But yeah, unfortunately, they were back in school there. It was largely ignored. It was mentioned, like this piece you're talking about here in CBS News, but this left out context, and everyone, including Dr. Fauci, said, we should get kids back in school, but only when it's safe, with this special qualifier, except when it's safe was a series of contrived, bogus reasons that didn't have any science behind them when the kids were already in school without masks or distancing or anything else with no negative consequences.
David Zweig, whose ideas are now published by MIT Press. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Abundance of
David.
Caution, available right now wherever you buy your books, if you buy your books in academic libraries.